Hokairi! Welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my worst books of 2020. Now, there was some drama on Book Twitter. When isn't there drama on Book Twitter, honestly? But about this video. And I just want to put as a disclaimer out there, if you get really upset hearing people talk about books that they don't like, why did you click this video? It says it in the title, what I'm going to be talking about. So these are not personal attacks. These are just books that didn't work for me. And if one of these is your favorite, I'm sorry, but you did click on the video. So let's get started. All of these books I gave either a 2 stars or a 1 star to. I wouldn't say that any of these books have received my hatred. I don't hate any of these. I just really didn't enjoy them, if that makes sense. So it's not like I would make a rant review about the books. I just didn't enjoy the process of reading them. The first one is going to be Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. Now this was also in my Retro Reads BookTube Challenge wrap-up, which I will link above and down below. So I'm reading some of BookTube's like older favorites on my channel every month. And this book was just nothing special. I mean, for the time that it was written, I can understand why it was so popular. You know, it has a lot of those tropes that were popular at the time of the Hunger Games and Divergent and the dystopian era, but I was not on BookTube at the time, but I can understand why people who were on BookTube at the time really liked this book. It was just forgettable. Like, I don't really have another word for it. The one thing that really did bother me about this book was the extreme case of Not Like Other Girls syndrome that our main character has. I can't even remember her name. But she just, every chance she got, had to make sure that you knew she wasn't like any other girl in the world, ever. And she just wanted to make sure you knew that. And while I don't mind the chosen one trope, which typically does include a little bit of not like the other girls or not like the other boys, you know, kind of naturally, while I don't mind that, this was just way too in your face and I couldn't handle it. So for that definitely dropped multiple stars off for me. And then upon reflection after reading the book, I couldn't give it anything above 2. So I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I wouldn't tell anyone don't pick it up. It's a waste of time, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it if anyone asked me for recommendations. The second book on this list is A Difficult Woman by, ooh, that is dirty. I didn't realize until I saw it in the ring light. Woo! How dirty. Paw prints all over this thing. I think that's as good as it's gonna get, but yes, Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. Now, her other collection of stories, or, you know, short stories or essays, Not That Bad, which is essays about rape culture, was one of my favorite books, and I actually have talked about it on my channel before, on my Books Before BookTube series, but this book just did not hit like that book did for me. None of these stories were enjoyable. Not that I expected sunshine and happiness, because, you know, it's called Difficult Women, but I didn't enjoy the process of reading literally any of these stories. Even though that might have been the point of the book, that doesn't make me want to read it or recommend it to other people to read it. So I think that while the difficult subjects tackled in these different essays are important, and, you know, talking about the morality of women and how women are forced to fit a mold that just doesn't match humans in general, but it's, you know, forced upon women often. So these kind of moral requirements, that's a discussion that needs to be had. I just don't think that this book did it in a way that would engage discussion, honestly. So while, again, didn't hate it, didn't enjoy reading it, and honestly, I need to learn to DNF. I have a problem. I'm like a completionist. Is that a word? Is that a thing that you can be? If it is, that's me. I can't leave anything half done. And I have that problem with books, so I really think I should have DNF'd this book, honestly, but I pushed through. So I ended up giving this 2 stars because, like I said, I think that it achieved its goal in telling uncomfortable or stories about women that make people uncomfortable, but I don't think that it really went beyond that. So yeah, I ended up giving this book 2 stars. Okay, this third book is an example of me needing to DNF again, 100%, and that is Silence by Shusaku Endo. Now, I mentioned that in a couple videos that I'm trying to read more Japanese literature, but that means that there's going to be translation involved, because my Japanese is not good enough yet to be able to, you know, just pick up a novel, especially one by an acclaimed, you know, writer, and be able to read it. So Shusaku Endo is a very praised writer in Japan, especially for the clarity of his language. It's supposed to be simply beautiful. And so that's what I was looking for here. Now, I don't know if it was the translation or what it was about this book, but it was so boring. I fell asleep almost every time I picked this book up. Again, I should have DNF'd it, but I pushed myself through it. And so at the end, I ended up giving this book like a 1 star out of spite. I think a lot of that frustration came from the fact that I was so excited for this book. So I love when books tackle religion, in whether it be a fantasy, you know, situation or a, you know, literary fiction, whatever it is. I love when religion is tackled or discussed with nuance and with different perspectives. And so this book was about when Christianity was heavily persecuted in Japan. And so if you're a priest in Japan at the time, you were very likely to be caught, tortured, and either forced to renounce your religion or publicly executed. And so this is a very fraught time in Japanese history that I was very curious about, because Japan doesn't do a good job of talking about their history in a bad light, right? So I was really interested to see what this Japanese writer had to say about that in his own words. And honestly, I still don't know. This book just kind of felt like, I don't even know, like a report of what these people did in their day. So he ate some food, and then he went to sleep, and then he stayed in this place for 3 weeks, and then he met this person, you know, so there was no real interaction between the characters that made me care about their fate. There was also no kind of discussion of this time period. It was just kind of a boring description of what a day in the life might have been like, you know? So I think that this received 1 star, 1, because I would fall asleep every time I read it, and 2, because of the level of disappointment that I had, because I went in with such high expectations. So yeah, this was not it. If anyone has read any other Shusaku Endo works and they have a recommendation of something that they think is really engaging and, you know, I might enjoy, I haven't written him off completely, but this book just wasn't it. But this cover is just gorgeous. Such a shame. The next book here is going to be The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I talked about this in one of my recent videos, I think. I just can't remember which one. But this book is supposed to be about the women's perspective on the Trojan War. So we almost always hear the story from Achilles' perspective. And I love Greek mythology and Greek myths, so I've read quite a few stories from Achilles' perspective. And I enjoy them. But this book was marketed as another viewpoint on that same story. And I was really excited to pick it up for that. However, half of this book is from Achilles' perspective. So half of this book was from the male gaze, not the female gaze at this time. And I didn't see the point of that. The other part of this book, the other half that was from the female perspective, didn't give any agency to the women. And I'm not saying you have to give them, you know, agency that isn't equatable to the time, but at least within the women's circle, you know, women have had their own culture at this time. And I wanted to see this kind of interactions between the women, even if it was behind the scenes. That also didn't exist, because the main female character interacts with Achilles 3/4 of the time. So it just kind of ended up being another retelling from some very similar perspectives. So I was really, really disappointed in this book. I don't think the writing was bad, so, you know, from that perspective, you know, I didn't dislike it. but yeah, the story itself just wasn't what it was marketed to be. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars, like I said, because the reading experience, like the writing itself, wasn't necessarily bad, but everything else was pretty much a no-no. Again, beautiful cover. I'm gonna keep it on my shelves for the cover, I'm not gonna lie. It's just gorgeous, but yeah, was not a fan. The next one I'm going to talk about here is probably my most controversial one on this list, and that is Middle Game by Seanan McGuire. Now, I love Seanan McGuire. The Wayward Children series, Into the Drowning Deep, which I have behind me, is under her other pen name. I love her lyrical writing, and I think she does a fantastic job of building worlds that just suck you in. However, Middle Game was just a mess for me, I think. There was no part of this book that was pretty coherent for me. The whole time I didn't really know what was going on. It kind of jumped through different time periods, and it also played with the idea of the cosmos and fate and, you know, how we're all interconnected. And I felt like those concepts, like there was too much in the book. There were so many big concepts that were trying to be tackled, and none of them were given enough time or explanation to actually make me engage with those concepts. I was just kind of skimming over the top of the story, like, what's going on now? Why are we talking about, you know, like quantum mechanics or whatever? I'm not sure that that was in the book, but that's kind of how I felt. I know some people who really loved this book, and some of them are really good friends of mine here on BookTube, but it was just not for me. And honestly, when I read this book just after, I always do my reviews just after I read the book, and so I gave this book 2 stars, but upon reflection and just thinking about it for a year, I think I'm gonna drop it down to 1, because I can't remember a point in this audiobook where I was enjoying myself, or a point in this audiobook where I was like, that's an interesting idea, let me think about that more. I just didn't have any feelings like that, so I think I might drop this down to a 1 star. I don't know if that's too harsh. Usually I reserve that for books that made me angry, and this didn't make me angry. But we'll see what I do, whether it's a 1 or a 2 star. But either way, this was a complete miss for me, and while I will read pretty much anything Seanan McGuire puts out, I know this is supposed to be a series, and I think I'm just going to avoid anything else that's in this world. So, yeah. The last book on this list is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Now, this book was also from my Retro Reads BookTube challenge, and this was a BookTube favorite back before, 2015, where those books come from. And I think for the time that it was written, again, like Red Queen, it's good. And I think if I'd read this book at 15, 16, I would have enjoyed it. But reading it now, at 28, it was not enjoyable, but it was not up to my standards or what I expect from my fantasy. There were a lot of character inconsistencies and world inconsistencies that pretty much drove me crazy the whole time I was reading. I did mention this in a video recently, so you may have heard me say this before, but the characters, the kid characters in this book have powers, and they're really strong powers. So it's like setting things on fire, levitating things, mind control, reading people's minds. And the world fears these kids, so they basically put them in concentration camps. But once these kids are free of these confines, I'm not going to get into any spoils or how this happens, but once they're kind of free to build their own environment and their own world, no one uses their powers. Even during the journey to the place where the kids end up being, the powers aren't used to do anything interesting. And I just felt kind of like, well, what is the point of these powers if not to make the story more interesting? I felt like it only served as a plot device as to why kids should be tortured, not really integrated into the story. And I just kind of felt that that wasn't that good of a plot point. Also, I hated the main character so much. I don't remember her name, I'm sure I've wiped it from my memory, but she's basically just a whiny, selfish brat the entire story. And then in the end, there's this supposed character arc where she's supposed to turn into this like badass who will kill anyone who comes for her friends. And this change happened in like 2 seconds. I was very confused. I didn't think any of the character work was done. You know, like any of the work was put in order for that character arc to come through. So yeah, this was just not for me. But again, I do recognize when it was written and the age group that it was written for. So in that regard, I gave this book 2 stars. That concludes my worst books of the year for 2021. No, that's next year. That concludes my worst books of 2020. Like I said, I didn't hate any of these books. Like I don't have vitriol towards them. Maybe a little bit towards Silence because of the level of disappointment that I faced. But besides that, none of these books made me, you know, angry or upset. They just weren't good for me. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, if you agree that they were not up to par, or if you disagree and thought they were amazing. I'd love to chat or debate down below in the comments. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jenny!